Bibliophiles of the internet, today I'm here to talk about some spooky recent reads. So I've actually read a small handful of things since I filmed my August wrap-up, and when I was looking over them, I realized that they're all kind of in the same vein. Pun only slightly intended. These 3 books run the gamut from straight-up horror to stories with paranormal or gothic elements. I think any of these will be great for so many different kinds of readers in the upcoming spooky season, which I'm already personally celebrating. So let's talk about them. Let's get started. This first book I actually finished in August after I'd already filmed my wrap-up. I read it as an e-arc at the time, but it's now available to read, and that is I Feed Her to the Beast and the Beast is Me by Jameson Shea, which came out on August 29th from Fierce Reads. This is an extremely dark and gruesome villain origin story about eldritch ballerinas. It follows this black bisexual young ballerina named Lore, who's American by birth but studying ballet in France. As a black girl, she stands out from the rest of her class, but not for the reasons she wants, and despite having put all her blood, sweat, and tears into her training, despite being one of the most dedicated and well-performing students, she knows her chances of making it professionally are very slim. So with these important auditions coming up, Lore decides to follow one of the principal dancers down into the catacombs, where she makes a deal with a primordial river of blood, exchanging her blood and her soul for the ability to exert her will over others and master the art of dance. But even as she claws her way to stardom and surpasses her peers, it becomes clear that Lore may not be the only monster around, and her immense power might just have made her the perfect target. Content warnings for descriptions of panic and anxiety, experienced racism and anti-blackness, absentee parents and estranged family dynamics, descriptions of blood, death, graphic injury, graphic violence, and some mild body horror, as well as some instances of vomit. This book was incredible. It is packed with intensity and drama from front to back. It felt like fire running through my veins. If you like stories about female rage, about messy, monstrous, unapologetic queer black girls, about matching harmful systems of power, violence for violence until they come crashing down in a blaze of vindictive glory, then you have to read this. Everything about this story is perfectly considered. The backdrop of a ballet academy is the perfect choice for a horror story, because if you know anything about how cutthroat the ballet industry is, the way it demands that you sacrifice your body, humanity, and individuality on the altar of beauty and grace, then having a monster be born into that atmosphere and because of that atmosphere makes a whole lot of sense. I can't even put into words how satisfying it is to read this book. Like I said, it's gruesome, it's violent, it's graphic, it pulls no punches when it comes to Lore slowly but surely giving herself over to monstrosity, and I love it for that. To see a young, poor, queer black girl lean into her power without remorse, without regret, without feeling the need to stifle herself or make any explanations, no matter how terrible and perhaps uncontrollable that power may be, is so incredibly cathartic. And it's so freeing because Lore has spent so much time doing things the quote-unquote right way, holding herself prisoner to these unattainable standards of skill and morality and restraint in all the ways that are supposed to make her acceptable and palatable, and it never works. So it's powerful to see her say, fuck it, I've tried to be 10 million different versions of myself to be what everyone else wants me to be. I've tried to follow these steps that are supposed to lead me to success, and it's not happening. So I'm gonna do things the way I want to. I'm not going to hope that people see me. I'm not going to give them a choice. It's taking that concept of carving out space for yourself to a whole new level and using this mechanic of forbidden eldritch power to show how you can't carve out that space for yourself by going down the path of least resistance. You have to make people uncomfortable. You have to make waves. You have to forcibly disrupt the system. You have to go against the grain, all of which are often perceived by those who hold power as violence. And the story tackles all of those things: white fragility, white compliance, and maintaining and upholding black suffering, and the semantics of marginality, how BIPOC people aren't allowed to succeed without being accused of taking someone else's opportunities, and it's bringing all of those conversations to the fore through this tremendously effective horror lens. The other thing I love about this story is that there are so many parallels to Phantom of the Opera, especially in its aesthetics and thematic explorations, which makes my heart very happy. I believe the ballet is actually set in the same opera house. It has that same vibe of selling your soul to the devil for the sake of achieving greatness. It has that same juxtaposition of this incredible artistic tradition being haunted by an evil or corrupt history. It's a similar sort of cautionary tale about exclusion and the desperation that might cause. But most importantly, I definitely see parallels between the two because they're both stories about being hurt by something you love so much, about how when you pour so much of yourself and your identity and your humanity into something that only seems to have value when it's witnessed or praised by others, you will inevitably come to live and die by the sword that is your own creation. That could be an entire thesis paper in and of itself, so I'll leave it at that. But suffice to say, I found those parallels to be very intentional, very satisfying, but also incredibly smart because it's very much in the background, it's in the subtext, and it doesn't stand in the way of what this story is trying to do. There's also a dark romance element that I was very much into. I do enjoy a good monster romance from time to time, if you know what I'm saying, but again, if you want to read something that makes you feel vindicated, feel deeply sated in your bones, feel as if you've been baptized in fire, then you have to read this. It also has one of those moments where you read the title in context and it shifts your entire world on its axis. I'm just gonna cut myself off there. I loved everything about this. I cannot recommend it enough, and I gave it 5 stars. Let's take a beat, let's reset, because we're gonna do a complete 180 from that in terms of tone and atmosphere, because after that I read My Roommate is a Vampire by Jenna Levine, which also came out on August 29th from Berkeley, who kindly sent me a finished copy of the book. This is an adult, contemporary, paranormal rom-com about Cassie Greenberg, an aspiring artist who's currently struggling and toiling away at multiple jobs. And when the story starts, she's just gotten the news that she's going to be evicted from her apartment because she can't make rent. Then she happens upon this very strangely worded, sketchy, too good to be true Craigslist ad for a room in a super nice area for only $200 a month. So obviously there must be a catch. Of course, Cassie assumes that this ad must have been put up by a serial killer, but the rent is simply too good to be passed up. So she agrees to tour the apartment. She meets her prospective roommate, and despite the fact that this man wears a 3-piece suit every single day, talks like something out of a Jane Austen novel, and has an apartment decorated with furniture from like the 18th century, she decides to move in. Obviously, you can guess from the title what's up with Cassie's new roommate, Frederick J. Fitzwilliam, but by the time Cassie figures it out herself, they've actually become quite close, and it turns out that Frederick might just have a proposition for her. Content warnings for some mentions of death and grief, references to family estrangement, non-graphic references to blood, instance of kidnapping, and explicit sexual content. And before I forget, Frederick is canonically bisexual, maybe pansexual. He mentions having had relationships with people of all genders and species, so technically, this is a queer romance. Reading this book was so much fun, I can't even tell you. This is the kind of spooky read that's perfect for anyone who doesn't actually like scary things. There's really nothing scary about this. It's a rom-com, heavy on the rom, heavy on the com. It has that paranormal element that would make you feel like you're taking part in spooky season without actually having to worry about losing sleep. I actually had the pleasure of sitting in on this author presentation that Berkeley Romance hosted, and when Jenna was talking about her book, she said that her vampiric inspirations for Frederick were the Count from Sesame Street, and I believe Nander from What We Do in the Shadows. Those were 2 massive green flags for me as soon as I heard them, and I immediately decided that I would get on famously with this story, and I was absolutely correct. This book is so freaking hilarious. I found myself laughing out loud and smiling so hard throughout pretty much the entire thing. I love that it's so over the top in the sense that you as the reader absolutely know what's going on, but Cassie is just so painfully oblivious. There's so much that she's just willing to take on faith, and she's just like, I don't know, he's just a weird dude. I don't know what to tell you. I do have to commend this story for the way it takes this classic dynamic we see time and time again in paranormal romance, which is to say a human falling for a vampire, and making it feel charming and endearing and surprisingly fresh. So often in these types of stories, the vampires in question are already acclimated to modern human society. They blend in for the most part, but there's something different and dangerous about them that makes them incredibly attractive to the main character or characters. But Frederick is an absolute anachronistic mess. This man is hopeless. He barely knows how to use technology. He knows nothing of modern currency or current events. Everything he owns is straight from the 18th century. He doesn't know that the internet exists nor how to use it. He knows nothing, but he's trying so hard to pretend that he does. And thus ensues this very slice of life comedy of errors where Frederick is continuously making a complete fool out of himself and Cassie is just trying to minimize the damage. It's just fun to follow these two in their everyday shenanigans, and I think that's part of what makes it feel so refreshing, because usually in vampire romances, the vampires are sleek and dangerous and sexy and all-knowing, and that's part of what lures in their romantic interest. But that dynamic is flipped in this story because the human character holds all the power in this case. The intimacy developing in this relationship comes from Frederick going out on a limb and being very vulnerable and obvious about the fact that he knows nothing, being open to learning and correction, which is like the opposite of toxic masculinity. And even though there's a lot he has to unlearn, the connection and bonding comes from both of them learning from each other in different ways. Speaking of how this story takes a lot of vampire romance conventions and flips them on their heads, I really appreciate how even though this is a vampire-human romance, it's not about romanticizing Cassie as a willing victim for Frederick. The story isn't leading up to Frederick hoping Cassie will become his personal blood bag. It's not about him lusting after her blood. It's not about them having conversations about if he'll turn her into a vampire so they can be together for eternity. It's very much about a human and a vampire just cohabitating and exploring what they have together without either one of them being expected to sacrifice something to be in this relationship, which is nice. My one little hangup is that there's not a third act breakup, yay, but there is a third act conflict that doesn't come out of left field, but doesn't feel as seamlessly integrated into the story as I would like. But honestly, I still highly recommend this, and I gave it a huge 4.5 stars. Lastly, I recently finished the audiobook for Foxglove by Adeline Grace, sequel to Belladonna, which is once again read by the inimitable Kristen Atherton. Don't worry, I'm going to keep it very general, I'm not going to spoil anything, but if you haven't read Belladonna yet, this is your sign to do so. And if you've read the first book but not the sequel yet, then this is also your sign from the universe. So both Belladonna and Foxglove are historical gothic murder mysteries and fantasy romances. We begin by following Signa, whose parents died when she was very young, and ever since she's been passed along to various relatives and guardians who have all died themselves. Her only remaining relatives are the Hawthorns, an eccentric and wealthy family who are mourning the family's matriarch. But as I said, death follows Signa wherever she goes, not just metaphorically, but literally in the incarnate form of death. And because she has this connection with death himself, that gives her the ability to walk the line between life and death. As such, she can see spirits, and the spirit of the Hawthorns' matriarch reaches out to Signa and tells her that she was actually murdered. And if Signa wants to keep the Hawthorns' youngest daughter from suffering that same fate, she must find the killer before they can strike again. Stick with me, but Book 2, no spoilers, is following yet another mysterious and tragic death that takes place within Signa's social circles, and one of her loved ones has been wrongfully framed for this person's death. So not only are Signa and her confidants working to exonerate this person using whatever tools and powers at their disposal, but Death's estranged brother and sworn enemy, Fate, has also entered the fray. Taking on the guise of a powerful prince, Fate has set himself up as an influential person, and Signa figures that pretending to warm up to him might shift the tides if she can play her cards right. But the more time she spends with Fate, she begins to exhibit these strange new powers that seem to link her to Fate's past. Content warnings for explorations of death and grief, some instances of vomit, animal death, some depictions of chronic illness and pregnancy complications, and some sexual content. This series has proved to be one of the most pleasant surprises I've had all year long. When I first saw the American cover especially and saw that it was gothic fantasy, gothic romance, I wrote it off as something I probably would never read. But it's so much more than I ever could have imagined. It's dark, it's creepy, it's deeply atmospheric and transporting, and the gothic romance elements are so incredibly delectable. There's really cool concepts of death magic and all these other kinds of magic that also dramatically intensify the mystery at hand and significantly raise the stakes. If you've heard me talk about the first book, you might have heard me say something like this, but Signa is an absolutely incredible character. The whole story is about her learning to not only accept but embrace this undeniable connection she has with death, learning that she might just be able to exercise the same dark reaper powers that he has, and not being afraid to master those powers, especially if they might lead her to answers. Her entire life, Signa's been denying this huge part of herself, terrified of what it might mean, what the implications might be, how it might change the way the world sees her, but she's pushed to this point where she can no longer afford to be afraid of herself. I think there's a kind of thematic connection there with I Feed Her to the Beast and The Beast Is Me, although they're two very different books, in the sense that they're both about these young girls who have been taught to fear their own power, who have been made weaker because of it, who have to learn how to be relentless in a world that oftentimes doesn't afford them that space. And again, I've been pleasantly surprised by how this second book maintains that darkness and that intrigue while also building upon this world and those themes in a way that's thought-provoking and complex. No spoilers, but in this installment, Signa's being torn in a lot of different directions and unsure of which path she should take. I think it's grappling with the idea that the world doesn't allow women especially to be full, complex, multitudinous, even contradictory people. They have to be simple, they have to be digestible, they have to be boiled down to one thing and only one thing. In Signa's case, she's discovering these strange new powers that don't seem to track with her Reaper magic, which is causing her to question everything. And she's very hesitant to explore those new parts of herself because she just went through this entire journey of accepting herself and she thought she knew exactly who she was. That's a really important thematic thread because so many of us don't allow ourselves to explore, to question, to discover new things about ourselves. We come up on these major milestones, we make these hard-won discoveries about ourselves that we believe are set in stone, and then we just hold that line for ourselves. But that's not how life works. The freedom to explore, the ability to question ourselves and the world around us is nothing short of precious, and I think it's great to see Signa taking that space for herself and sitting in the discomfort of knowing that maybe she's something that defies simple explanation, and that's okay. Much like the first book, I think this sequel is so incredibly satisfying to read. There's once again a compelling murder mystery that needs solving. With both fate and death in the mix, there's a lot of romantic and magical interference that makes things all the more complicated, and the story continues to deliver on those dark gothic elements. There's haunted manors and disquieted spirits, otherworldly forces and sentient forms, characters who can traverse between the planes of life and death, drama to the highest degree imaginable. I cannot wait to see where the third and final book will take us, and I would absolutely recommend both books in this series so far. I haven't decided yet on a rating for this one, but I suspect it will most likely be above 4 stars. So those are the 3 most recent books I've read. As I said, some are darker, some are spookier than others, but I like to think there's a little something for everyone. If you read any of these books yourself, or if you plan to, I'd love to hear your thoughts down below in the comments. But that's everything I had to share for this recent reads roundup today. Thank you so much for watching, and until next time, educate yourself, be kind to yourself, take care of yourself, and I will catch you on the flip side of the page.